The desert sky over New Mexico territory stretched like a bruised canvas, purple-black clouds gathering against the dying light of 1878. Wind whipped across the endless expanse of sand and sage, carrying the sharp scent of creosote and the promise of a cold night ahead. The air hung dry as old bones, sucking moisture from everything it touched. Clara Mitchell pressed herself against the rough adobe wall of her father's ranch house, her breath coming in short gasps. Through the window, orange lamplight flickered across a scene that would haunt her forever. 3 men stood over her father's body, their faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats, revolvers still smoking in their hands. "Should have sold when we asked nicely." "Old man," growled the tallest figure, nudging Samuel Mitchell's lifeless form with his boot. "Now look what stubbornness gets you." Clara bit down on her knuckles to stifle a sob. Her father lay sprawled across the wooden floor, a dark stain spreading beneath him. The deed to their modest cattle ranch, the paper those men had come for, remained locked in the iron safe behind his desk, its combination known only to her and her father. "Search the house," ordered the leader. "Find the girl. She knows where he kept the papers." Terror shot through Clara's veins like ice water. She'd been returning from the well when she'd heard the gunshots, had crept close enough to witness the murder through the window. Now she had seconds to decide, burst through the door and likely meet her father's fate, or flee into the unforgiving desert night. The choice made itself when heavy footsteps approached the back door. Clara turned and ran, her worn boots kicking up small clouds of dust as she sprinted toward the stable. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "If trouble ever comes, take Buttercup and ride hard for Fort Stanton. Don't look back." But Buttercup whinnied nervously as Clara approached, and she realized with growing dread that the men would hear any attempt to saddle and mount the mare. Instead, she grabbed only her father's canteen from its hook, barely half full, and slipped through the gap in the stable's back wall. The desert swallowed her whole. She ran until her lungs burned, stumbling over rocks and thorny plants that tore at her riding skirt. Behind her, men's voices rose in anger as they discovered her absence. Soon they'd have horses, dogs maybe. They couldn't leave a witness alive. Clara forced herself to think as her father had taught her. The full moon wouldn't rise for hours. Darkness was her ally now. She needed to put distance between herself and the ranch. Find somewhere to hide until she could figure out her next move. Fort Stanton lay 2 days' ride to the east, an impossible journey on foot with half a canteen of water. She'd covered perhaps 3 miles when the sound of hoofbeats made her dive behind a cluster of tall yucca plants. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed herself flat against the sandy ground. But the rhythm was wrong. Not the thundering of multiple horses in pursuit, but the steady, measured pace of a single rider. The horseman appeared like a specter against the star-swept sky, moving with an eerie silence despite his mount's movement. He rode without urgency, his silhouette suggesting a lean figure topped with a flat-crowned hat. As he drew closer, Clara noticed how he bent occasionally from his saddle, studying the ground in the fading light. A tracker. Her blood ran cold. They'd hired someone who could follow her trail even in darkness. The rider stopped suddenly, his horse snorting softly. He dismounted in one fluid motion, crouching to examine something in the dirt. Clara held her breath, acutely aware that she'd left plenty of sign in her panicked flight-torn fabric on thorns, disturbed sand, broken twigs. "You can come out," the man said quietly, his voice carrying a slight Mexican accent. "I am not with those who chase you." Clara remained frozen, uncertain whether this was a trick. The tracker sighed, standing slowly. "The men who killed Samuel Mitchell ride in the opposite direction, toward Tularosa. They think you went that way because someone saw a woman on horseback heading south." He paused. "But you are here, hiding like a rabbit in the brush, with no horse and little water." "How do you—" Clara began, then caught herself. "Know these things?" The man turned toward her hiding spot, and moonlight caught his features. Angular face, skin bronzed by sun and wind, eyes dark as the desert night. "I am Elias Redhawk. I track for the army sometimes, for ranchers other times. Tonight, I tracked because I heard gunshots and saw men fleeing Mitchell's ranch. I knew Samuel. He was a good man. Slowly, carefully, Clara emerged from behind the yucca. Her throat felt raw from running, and she swayed slightly on her feet. They murdered him. For the land deed. They'll kill me too if they find me. Elias studied her with the intense focus of a hawk evaluating prey. Clara could see his Apache heritage in his cheekbones, the Mexican influence in his manner. A mestizo. Her father would have said, caught between two worlds, welcome in neither. You cannot survive the desert alone, he stated simply. By dawn, you will be dead from thirst or exposure if the coyotes don't find you first. Then what do you suggest? Clara tried to keep the desperation from her voice and failed. Elias moved back to his horse, a sturdy paint mare that stood calmly despite the tension in the air. He pulled a second canteen from his saddlebags and tossed it to Clara, who caught it gratefully. Drink slowly, he advised. Too much too fast and you will be sick. The water tasted of leather and mineral, but Clara had never tasted anything so sweet. She forced herself to take small sips while Elias continued to study their surroundings. Those men will realize their mistake by morning, he said. They will come back this way. Spread out, search properly. You need to be far from here by then. Fort Stanton is 2 days on foot. If you survive the heat and don't get lost, the Malpais lava flows block the direct route. You would have to go around, adding another day. He turned back to her. Or, Clara waited, sensing the weight of his next words. A midnight ride with the desert tracker might save your life. Elias said quietly, I know paths through this land that no white man has seen, places where even determined killers won't follow. Why would you help me? Clara asked, suspicion creeping into her voice despite her desperate situation. You don't know me. I knew your father. He treated me fairly when other ranchers would not sell to a half-breed. Elias's voice carried no bitterness, just stated fact. And I have no love for men who murder for land. This desert has seen too much blood already. Clara weighed her options. Trust this stranger who moved through the darkness like he was born to it, or attempt the impossible journey alone. In the distance, a coyote howled, answered by another, then another. The desert was waking up, and she was prey without protection. All right, she said finally. I'll ride with you. Elias nodded once, then moved to his horse. You will ride in front. Hold tight to the saddle horn. Desert Rose knows these trails, but they are rough. We will ride hard until the moon sets, then find shelter. He swung up into the saddle with practiced ease, then extended his hand to Clara. His grip was calloused, but gentle as he pulled her up, settling her in front of him. The warmth of another human being after her terror and flight nearly undid her composure. Do not look back, Elias murmured, echoing her father's words. From this moment, you ride toward tomorrow, not yesterday. With a soft command in Spanish, he urged Desert Rose forward. The mare picked her way carefully at first, then settled into a ground-eating lope as they left the familiar landmarks of Clara's life behind. The desert stretched endlessly before them, hostile and beautiful under the emerging stars. Clara gripped the saddle horn until her knuckles ached, aware of Elias's steady presence behind her, his arms bracketing her as he held the reins. The rhythm of the horse's movement and the vast silence of the desert night created an almost dreamlike state. Was this real? Hours ago, she'd been helping her father mend fences, planning the meals for the week, living the only life she'd known. Now he was dead, and she was fleeing through darkness with a man she'd never met. The men who killed him, she said suddenly, needing to break the silence. I recognized one voice, Jake Thornton. He's been trying to buy our land for months. Thornton, Elias's voice was thoughtful. He owns the Double Bar Tea Ranch, a hard man with powerful friends. My father refused to sell, said that land had been in my mother's family since before the war. Said he'd die before. Her voice broke. Elias said nothing, but his arm tightened slightly, steadying her as Desert Rose navigated a steep descent into an arroyo. The gesture was subtle but comforting. They rode on as the sliver moon climbed higher. casting everything in silver and shadow. The desert that had seemed so threatening during her flight now revealed a terrible beauty, towering saguaro cacti like ancient sentinels, rocky formations carved by wind and time, the occasional glimpse of eyes reflecting their passage. "Where are we going?" Clara asked as exhaustion began to creep over her. "There is a place," Elias replied. "Hidden canyon with water and shelter. We will rest there until dawn. Then continue." "Continue where? I have nowhere to go, no family left. Tomorrow's worry," he said simply. "Tonight, we survive." As if to emphasize his point, a distant sound made him tense. Clara heard it too, the faint echo of horses, maybe miles away, but carried on the still air. "They search already," Elias muttered. Without warning, he urged Desert Rose off the trail they'd been following, guiding her down into a dry wash. "We leave no straight path for them to follow." The next hour passed in a blur of careful navigation, backtracking, and stream crossings designed to confuse any tracker. Clara marveled at how Elias seemed to see in the dark, choosing paths she couldn't even make out until they were on them. Finally, as the moon touched the western horizon, he guided them through a narrow crack in a cliff face that opened into a small, protected canyon. The sound of trickling water reached Clara's ears, a spring feeding a small pool surrounded by cottonwoods. "We rest here," Elias announced, dismounting and helping Clara down. Her legs nearly buckled from exhaustion and the long ride. As he tended to Desert Rose, Clara collapsed beside the pool, cupping the cold water to drink and wash the dust from her face. In the growing darkness before dawn, she could just make out Elias's efficient movements as he unsaddled the mare and set up a simple camp. "No fire," he said, joining her by the water. "The smoke would give us away." Clara nodded, wrapping her arms around herself as the desert cold seeped into her bones. Without a word, Elias pulled a blanket from his pack and draped it around her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. I would have died out there." "Perhaps," he agreed. "Or perhaps you are stronger than you know. Your father's daughter would not give up easily." The mention of her father brought fresh tears. "They killed him for paper, for dirt and cattle. Men kill for less in this land," Elias said quietly. "I have seen it too many times." Something in his tone made Clara study his profile in the darkness. "You've lost someone too. My mother's people, killed by soldiers. My father's family, rejecting their mestizo grandson." He shrugged. "The desert is my family now. It is honest in its harshness." They sat in companionable silence as the eastern sky began to lighten almost imperceptibly. Soon they would need to move again. But for now, Clara felt safer than she had since seeing her father fall. "My shadow will follow you," Elias said suddenly, so quietly she almost missed it. "Whether you run toward dawn or back to darkness, this is what the desert teaches. Some things follow us always." Clara shivered. Though not from cold, there was something prophetic in his words, a weight that pressed against her chest. She was only beginning to understand that this midnight ride was not an ending, but a beginning. Of what? She couldn't yet say. The desert came alive as they rode through the pre-dawn darkness, leaving the hidden canyon behind. Clara felt every muscle protest as Desert Rose picked her way along paths invisible to her eyes, but clear to Elias's practiced gaze. The blanket he'd given her was now tied around her waist, providing some protection against the thorny plants that reached for them from the shadows. Sand whispered against stone with each gust of wind, creating an otherworldly music that seemed to speak of ancient secrets. In the distance, coyotes called to each other, not the hunting cries that had frightened her earlier, but something more like conversation, as if commenting on the strange pair passing through their territory. "Keep your head down," Elias murmured as they approached a narrow passage between two towering rock formations. "Low branches ahead." Clara ducked, feeling the scrape of mesquite branches across her back. The scent of horse sweat mixed with the sharp fragrance of sage and the earthy smell of Elias's leather vest. It was a combination that would forever after remind her of this night of flight and fear, but also of unexpected salvation. They'd been riding for perhaps 2 hours since leaving the canyon when Elias suddenly reined Desert Rose to a halt, his body tensed behind Clara, alert as a hunting cat. Without speaking, he pointed to their left, where a dust cloud rose against the lightening sky. "Riders," he breathed. "Moving fast, looking for something, or someone." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Is it them?" "Too far to tell, but we assume yes." He guided Desert Rose off the trail and into a labyrinth of tall boulder formations. "The Malpais begins here. Bad country, but good for hiding." The landscape changed dramatically as they entered the ancient lava flow region. Jagged black rock replaced sand, creating a twisted moonscape that looked like the earth itself had boiled and frozen in place. Desert Rose stepped carefully, her hooves clicking against the volcanic stone. "This place," Clara whispered, awed despite her fear. "It's like the mouth of hell. The Apaches say it is where the earth gods showed their anger." Elias replied, "But it will shield us. Few men know the safe paths through." As if to prove his point, he led them through passages Clara would never have seen, gaps between lava walls barely wide enough for a horse, natural bridges over deep crevasses, smooth channels worn by centuries of flash floods. The rising sun painted the black rock in shades of red and gold, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. They stopped in the shadow of a particularly tall formation, and Elias produced a piece of jerky from his saddlebag, breaking it in half to share with Clara. "Eat," he commanded. "You will need strength." Clara chewed the tough, salty meat slowly, her throat still dry despite the water she'd drunk. "How do you know these paths?" "My grandmother's people lived here before the white men came. She taught me to read the land like others read books." He scanned the horizon continuously as he spoke, never relaxing his vigilance. "Each rock formation has a name, a story. That one there," he pointed to a twisted spire, "is Coyote's Tooth. Beyond it lies Snake Dance Ridge. My grandmother could navigate by them even on the darkest night. And you?" A slight smile touched his lips. "I am not so skilled as she was, but sufficient for our needs." As the sun climbed higher, the black rock began to radiate heat. Clara felt perspiration bead on her forehead, her riding dress clinging uncomfortably to her skin. Elias noticed her discomfort. "We will find shade soon. The worst heat comes at midday. Better to rest then, travel in evening." "Won't they search during the day too?" White men often make that mistake. They push through the heat, exhausting themselves and their horses. He guided Desert Rose around a particularly treacherous section of broken rock. The desert has its own rhythms. Fight them and you lose. They rode in silence for another hour, the landscape gradually shifting from lava rock back to more familiar desert terrain. Clara found herself studying Elias's hands on the reins, brown and weathered, but gentle in their control of the horse. Everything about him spoke of competence, of someone who'd learned to survive in a world that offered no easy paths. "There," he said finally, pointing to a cluster of cottonwoods in the distance. "Water and shade. We rest." The trees marked another hidden spring, this one feeding a larger pool surrounded by grass and flowering plants. Desert Rose whinnied softly, sensing water, and Elias let her pick up the pace for the final approach. As he helped Clara dismount, his hands lingered for just a moment on her waist, steadying her. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the strange intimacy created by their shared flight. Then the moment broke, and Elias turned to tend his horse. Clara knelt by the pool, splashing water on her face and neck. In the clearer light of day, she could see her reflection, hair wild with wind and sand, her face streaked with dust and tears, her dress torn in several places. She looked like a different person from the rancher's daughter who'd started the day planning to help with the cattle branding. "You should rest," Elias said, spreading a blanket in the shade. "I will keep watch. I don't think I can sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see—" "Then don't close them yet. Talk instead." He settled with his back against a cottonwood trunk. rifle across his knees. "Tell me about your father." So Clara talked, the words flowing like water from a broken dam. She told him about Samuel Mitchell, who'd come west after the war seeking a new start, who'd met her mother at a church social in Santa Fe and courted her despite her family's disapproval of the gringo soldier, about building the ranch together, raising cattle, the dreams they'd had for expanding the herd. "He taught me to read using the Bible and cattle breeding records," she said with a wan smile. "Said a woman should know letters and numbers just as well as any man. The other ranchers thought he was foolish, teaching a daughter instead of praying for sons." He was right. Elias said simply, "Knowledge does not care if you wear skirts or trousers." "What about your family?" Clara asked, curious about this man who'd appeared from nowhere to save her life. Elias was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain worn smooth by time. "My mother was Apache, captured in a raid, sold to a Mexican rancher as a servant. My father was the rancher's son. When I was born, the family was displeased." He smiled bitterly. "Neither Mexican enough nor Apache enough, so I learned to live between worlds, belonging to none. But your grandmother taught you. She found me when I was 10, working in the stables, convinced my father to let her take me for a season, teach me the old ways." His expression softened at the memory. "That season became years. She showed me how to track, to find water, to read weather signs. Most important, she taught me that a man's worth comes from his actions, not his blood." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "She sounds wise." Died 3 winters ago. Left me her knowledge and her stubbornness." He looked directly at Clara then, his dark eyes intense. "Your father reminded me of her. He judged by character, not appearance. It is rare." They sat quietly as the sun reached its zenith, the heat pressing down like a physical weight. Desert Rose dozed in the shade, tail swishing occasionally at flies. The peaceful scene seemed impossibly at odds with the violence and fear of the previous night. "They'll keep hunting me," Clara said eventually. "Jake Thornton isn't the type to give up. He wants that land, and I'm the only thing standing in his way. Then we make sure he does not find you. For how long? I can't hide forever, and you can't—" She paused, unsure how to continue. "You have your own life. I can't ask you to risk it for a stranger." Elias stood abruptly, moving to check the horizon. "You did not ask. I offered." He glanced back at her. "My life is the desert, the trail, the next job. Today, the job is keeping Samuel Mitchell's daughter alive. Tomorrow," he shrugged, "tomorrow will bring its own paths." Something in his tone made Clara shiver despite the heat. There was loneliness there, deep and enduring. She recognized it because she felt its echo in her own chest. The isolation of being different, of not quite fitting the mold others expected. "I'm grateful," she said softly. "More than I can say." He nodded, accepting her thanks without ceremony. "Rest now. We have several hours before it is safe to ride again." Clara lay back on the blanket, exhaustion finally overwhelming her spinning thoughts. As she drifted toward sleep, she heard Elias humming softly, a melody she didn't recognize, probably Apache or Mexican, haunting and beautiful. The sound followed her into dreams where her father still lived and shadows danced at the edge of vision. She woke to Elias's hand gentle on her shoulder. The sun had passed its peak, throwing longer shadows across the desert floor. "Time to move," he said. "I've seen dust clouds to the south. They are spreading their search." As Clara sat up, she noticed he'd refilled all the canteens, and Desert Rose was already saddled. How long had he maintained his vigil while she slept? "Where are we going?" she asked as he helped her mount. "There is a settlement, Agua Dulce, a day's ride north, small, but with honest people. The widow who runs the boarding house owes me a favor. You will be safe there while we decide next steps." "We?" The word slipped out before Clara could stop it. Elias swung up behind her, his presence now familiar and steadying. "You think I would leave you at the first town?" He made a soft clicking sound. And Desert Rose began walking. My shadow follows where it will. Clara Mitchell. For now, it follows you. As they rode out from the cottonwoods shelter, Clara pondered his words. In the span of one night, this strange, quiet man had become her lifeline. She knew nothing of his past beyond the fragments he'd shared, nothing of his dreams or desires. Yet she trusted him with a bone-deep certainty that defied logic. The afternoon sun beat down as they traveled, but Elias chose their path carefully, finding shade where possible, maintaining a steady but unhurried pace. He pointed out landmarks as they went, teaching her to navigate as his grandmother had taught him. That ridge there, see how it looks like a sleeping woman? The Apache call her Earth Mother's Rest. If you are ever lost, find her profile and you know water lies 2 miles northeast. Clara absorbed every lesson, understanding that he was giving her tools for survival should they be separated. The thought sent an unexpected pang through her chest. As purple shadows began to stretch across the sand, marking the approach of another night, Clara felt the weight of her new reality settling on her shoulders. She was no longer Samuel Mitchell's daughter. Safe in her known world, she was a woman marked for death, fleeing across hostile terrain with only the skills of a desert tracker standing between her and those who would silence her forever. Yet, somehow, with Elias's steady presence at her back and Desert Rose's rhythmic gait beneath her, she felt not despair, but a strange kind of hope. The desert that had seemed so threatening now revealed itself as a place of hidden beauty and secret paths. Perhaps she too could learn to navigate between worlds, to find strength in the spaces others overlooked. "Look there," Elias said suddenly, pointing to the eastern sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. "Venus rises first tonight, a good omen." Clara watched the bright planet emerge from the darkening sky and made a silent promise to her father's memory. She would survive this. She would find justice. And perhaps, in this vast and unforgiving land, she might discover who she was meant to become. The desert wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain from distant mountains. Somewhere in the gathering darkness, a wolf howled. Not the menacing sound she might have once feared, but simply another voice in the vast conversation between earth and sky. Clara leaned back slightly, feeling Elias adjust his hold to support her, and let Desert Rose carry them forward into whatever tomorrow would bring. The town of Agua Dulce appeared just after dawn, a collection of adobe buildings huddled against the base of red sandstone cliffs. Smoke rose from chimneys, and Clara could smell bread baking. Such a normal, domestic scent that it made her throat tight with unexpected emotion. After 2 days in the wilderness, civilization seemed both welcoming and dangerous. "Keep your head down," Elias advised as they approached the outskirts. "Your face may not be known here, but caution costs nothing." He guided Desert Rose down a back street, avoiding the main thoroughfare where early rising merchants were already setting up their wares. A few dogs barked at their passage, but otherwise they attracted little attention. The boarding house sat at the town's edge, a 2-story structure with a wooden gallery wrapped around the upper floor. A sign reading Mrs. Catherine Donnelly's respectable lodgings creaked in the morning breeze. Elias dismounted and helped Clara down, then tied Desert Rose to the hitching post. "Let me speak first," he said quietly, then knocked on the heavy wooden door. The woman who answered was perhaps 50, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and shrewd blue eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes widened slightly upon seeing Elias, then narrowed as they took in Clara's disheveled appearance. "Elias Redhawk," she said, her Irish accent still thick despite years in the territory. "And what trouble are you bringing to my doorstep this fine morning?" "The kind that needs your discretion, Catherine," Elias replied. "May we come in, Mrs.?" Donnelly studied them both for a long moment, then stepped aside. "You know the way to the kitchen. I'll put the coffee on." The kitchen was warm and spotlessly clean, with herbs hanging from the rafters and bright curtains at the windows. Clara sank gratefully into a chair while Mrs. Donnelly bustled about, setting out cups and slicing thick pieces of bread. "Now then," the widow said, settling across from them with her own cup. "Tell me why you've brought this poor child to my door looking like she's been dragged through the desert by wild horses." Alias laid out the basic facts: Samuel Mitchell's murder, the threat to Clara, their flight across the desert. He kept his voice neutral, but Clara noticed how his hand rested on the table, ready to reach for his gun if needed. Mrs. Donnelly listened without interruption, her expression growing grimmer with each detail. When Elias finished, she turned to Clara. "Your father was a good man. Child. Bought beef from him just last month. Fair prices. Honest weights." She shook her head. "These land disputes grow bloodier each year. Too many men think the law extends only as far as their gun hand." "I need somewhere safe for her," Elias said, "just until we can determine the next course." "We, Mrs." Donnelly's eyebrow arched. Since when does Elias Redhawk concern himself with we? A faint color touched Elias's bronzed cheeks. Since Samuel Mitchell's daughter needed help. The widow studied him with knowing eyes, then nodded. "She can have the back room upstairs. Quieter there, and the window overlooks the stable. Good for keeping watch. As for you, I'll camp outside town, close enough to watch, far enough to avoid notice." "Nonsense. You'll take the room above the stable. I'll not have you sleeping rough when there's a perfectly good loft going empty." Her tone brooked no argument. "Now, let's see about getting Miss Mitchell cleaned up and fed properly. You look half-starved. Child." An hour later, Clara barely recognized herself in the mirror. Mrs. Donnelly had provided a simple but clean dress, helped her wash the desert from her hair, and tended the various scratches and bruises from their flight. For the first time since witnessing her father's death, Clara felt almost human again. She found Elias in the stable, tending to Desert Rose. He'd washed as well, his black hair still damp, wearing a clean shirt Mrs. Donnelly must have procured from somewhere. "Thank you," Clara said from the doorway. "For everything." He glanced up from checking Desert Rose's hooves. "You look better, rested." "I don't feel it." She entered the stable, breathing in the familiar scents of hay and horse. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and this will all be a nightmare." "It is real, but so is your survival." He straightened, studying her with those dark, penetrating eyes. "What will you do now?" The question she'd been avoiding pressed down on her. "I don't know. I can't go back to the ranch. They'll be watching it. I have no other family, no friends powerful enough to stand against Jake Thornton." "The law?" Clara laughed bitterly. "The sheriff in our county is Thornton's cousin. Even if he wasn't, what proof do I have? My word against 3 men who'll swear they were nowhere near our ranch that night." Elias was quiet for a moment, then said, "There are other forms of justice." Something in his tone made Clara shiver. "What do you mean?" "Nothing you need to concern yourself with now." He moved past her toward the door. "Rest, heal, then decide." But Clara caught his arm, feeling the coiled strength beneath her fingers. "Elias, promise me you won't do anything reckless." He looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. "I make no promises I cannot keep." Gently, he removed her hand. "But I will do nothing to bring more danger to your door." Before Clara could respond, he was gone, moving with that silent grace that made him seem more spirit than man. She stood in the stable doorway, watching him disappear into the maze of buildings, feeling strangely bereft. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Clara helped Mrs. Donnelly with the boarding house work, cooking, cleaning, mending. It felt good to have purpose, to keep her hands busy while her mind churned. The widow asked no questions but provided steady comfort and practical wisdom. "Grief's a strange beast," she said one evening as they prepared dinner together. "Comes and goes like desert rain, sudden, overwhelming, then leaving you parched again. You speak from experience. Lost my Patrick to mine collapse 10 years past. Thought I'd die from the pain of it." She kneaded bread dough with practiced movements. "But here I stand, proof that we're stronger than we know." Elias appeared each evening like clockwork. slipping in through the back door as shadows lengthened. He brought news from his scouting Thornton's men were still searching, had questioned travelers on all the main roads, but hadn't yet connected Clara to Agua Dulce. They grow frustrated, he reported on the third night. One of them got drunk in Tularosa, boasting about how they'd soon own the biggest ranch in the county. "Let them boast," Clara said fiercely. "My father's blood is on their hands." Elias studied her across the kitchen table. "You have changed in 3 days. The frightened rabbit I found in the desert shows her claws." "Is that good or bad?" "That depends on what you plan to do with those claws." Their eyes met and held. In the lamplight, Clara could see flecks of gold in his dark irises, could read the question there. Who was she becoming? What did she want? "I want justice," she said finally, "but I don't know how to get it. Justice is a luxury in this land." "Mrs. Donnelly interjected, setting down mugs of coffee. "Sometimes the best we can do is survive and build something new from the ashes." That night, Clara lay wakeful, staring at the ceiling. Through her window, she could see a sliver of the stable loft where Elias slept. Or did he? Sometimes she suspected he spent the nights roaming the desert, keeping watch in his own way. The thought of him out there, her self-appointed guardian, stirred feelings she wasn't ready to examine. In just days, he'd become essential to her sense of safety. But it was more than that. The way he moved, spoke, observed the world with such careful attention. He was unlike any man she'd known. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Clara?" Elias's voice. "Urgent. Get dressed. Quickly." She threw on her dress and opened the door. He stood in the hallway, fully armed, tension radiating from every line of his body. "What is it?" Riders approaching from the south, moving without lights, trying to stay quiet. His hand rested on his gun. "Could be nothing. Could be trouble." Clara's heart began to race. "Have they found me? Perhaps, or perhaps they seek someone else entirely, but we take no chances." He handed her a small bundle. "Food, water, money. If I tell you to run, you take the back stairs. Get to the stable. There's a horse saddled and ready. Not Desert Rose. She's too recognizable. Ride north to Fort Stanton. What about you? I will do what needs doing." He moved toward the stairs. "Stay in your room. Bar the door. Do not come out unless I call for you. Elias." But he was already gone. Clara barred the door as instructed, then pressed her ear against it, straining to hear. The boarding house was silent except for the usual night sounds, someone snoring in a nearby room, the building settling, wind rattling windows, then raised voices from outside, Mrs. Donnelly's Irish brogue, sharp with indignation. A man's voice responding, aggressive, demanding. Clara's blood chilled as she recognized it, not Jake Thornton himself, but one of his men, Ben Wallace, who'd always looked at her with hungry eyes when he came to buy cattle. No, she's here. Wallace was saying, "Tracked her this far. That half-breed tracker of hers left signs clear as day." Elias wouldn't leave signs unless he meant to. Clara realized he'd led them here deliberately. But why? "I run a respectable establishment." "Mrs. Donnelly replied coldly. "I don't appreciate armed men disturbing my guests in the middle of the night. State your business or move along." "Our business is with Clara Mitchell. Hand her over and nobody gets hurt." "Never heard of her." The conversation continued, growing more heated. Clara gripped the bundle Elias had given her, torn between following his instructions and the urge to confront these men herself. A new voice entered the mix. Elias, calm and steady. "You look for someone. Senor?" "You!" Wallace snarled. "Should have known that breed would be involved. Where is she? Who? Don't play games. Track her. We know you helped her escape. I help many people. Track for many others. You will need to be more specific." Clara heard the distinctive click of a hammer being cocked. "How's this for specific?" "Unwise," Elias said softly. "You are 3 men in a town full of witnesses. You think to murder us all?" A long pause. Then Wallace. "We'll be back. With more men. with the law. The law that lets murderers walk free? Mrs. Donnelly's voice dripped contempt. Bring your cousin sheriff. I'll tell him exactly what I think of men who kill for land. Footsteps retreated. Horses riding away. Clara waited, hardly breathing, until Elias knocked again. They are gone, for now. She unbarred the door to find him standing with Mrs. Donnelly, both looking grim. Pack your things, the widow said. You can't stay here now. They'll return as promised, and I can't protect you from a whole gang. Clara felt despair wash over her. I'm sorry. I've brought danger to your door. Nonsense. I knew the risk when I took you in. Mrs. Donnelly squeezed her shoulder. But you need to leave before dawn. Elias knows a place. Within an hour, they were mounted and riding. Clara on the steady mare Elias had prepared. He on Desert Rose. The town slept peacefully, unaware of the drama that had unfolded. As they reached the outskirts, Clara turned for one last look at the boarding house where she'd found temporary sanctuary. Where are we going? She asked as they headed into the desert once more. West, into the mountains. I know people there who care nothing for territorial law or land disputes. He glanced at her. It will be hard traveling. Are you prepared? Clara straightened in her saddle, thinking of her father, of the home she'd lost, of the justice that seemed impossibly out of reach. Then she thought of the man riding beside her, who asked nothing but gave everything, whose shadow had indeed followed her from that first terrible night. I'm ready, she said, and meant it. As they rode toward the mountains, the eastern sky began to lighten once more. Another dawn, another flight, but this time, Clara felt no fear, only determination. They thought her a helpless woman, easily frightened, easily silenced. They were wrong. Beside her, Elias began to hum that haunting melody again, and Clara found herself humming along. Two voices in harmony, riding toward an uncertain future, bound by something deeper than words. Behind them, their shadows stretched long across the desert floor, intertwined and inseparable as the new day began. 5 years had passed since that desperate flight through the desert night. Clara stood at the window of her dress shop in Silver Creek, watching the afternoon shadows lengthen across Main Street. The town had grown prosperous with the arrival of the railroad 2 years prior, bringing new settlers and fresh opportunities for those willing to work hard. She'd built a good life here. Her skill with needle and thread, learned during long evenings at her father's ranch, had evolved into a thriving business. Clara's fine dressmaking, painted in gold letters on the window, brought in customers from as far as Albuquerque. She employed 2 young women now, teaching them the trade while providing honest work. The bell above her door chimed, and Clara looked up from the wedding dress she was hemming. Henry Westbrook entered, removing his hat with the practiced gesture of a man raised to be proper. His sandy hair was neatly combed, his suit impeccable despite the dust that pervaded everything in New Mexico territory. Miss Mitchell, he said warmly, I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all. Mr. Westbrook, just finishing some detail work. She set aside her sewing, smoothing her skirts as she stood. How may I help you? Henry shifted nervously, a departure from his usual composed demeanor as the town's most promising young lawyer. I actually came to... That is, I wondered if you might join me for supper this evening. The hotel dining room has fresh oysters brought in on ice from California. Clara hesitated. This wasn't the first time Henry had asked, and she knew his intentions went beyond mere friendship. He was everything a woman in her position should want: educated, prosperous, respected. He offered security, stability, a life free from the shadows of the past. That's very kind, she began, but Henry stepped closer. Clara, may I call you Clara? I know you've been hesitant to accept my invitations, but I hope you know my admiration for you is sincere. You've built something remarkable here, against all odds. I greatly respect that. And you. His earnestness touched her. Here was a good man offering a good life. Why did she hesitate? The answer came, as it always did, in the memory of dark eyes and steady hands, of a voice saying, my shadow will follow you for years. She'd heard nothing from Elias Redhawk since he'd left her with friends in the mountain settlements 5 years ago. He'd simply vanished one morning, leaving only a note. Live well, be strong. I appreciate your invitation, Henry, she said gently. Perhaps. Her words died as movement outside caught her eye. A lone rider approached from the desert, silhouetted against the reddening sky. Something about the way he sat his horse, the tilt of his hat. Clara's heart stuttered. It couldn't be. Excuse me, she said abruptly, moving toward the door. I need to check something. She stepped onto the wooden sidewalk, shading her eyes against the slanting sun. The rider drew closer, and there was no mistaking that fluid grace, the way he seemed part of the horse itself. Desert Rose was gone. This was a different mount, a black stallion, but the man was unmistakable. Elias Redhawk had returned. He dismounted at the hitching post, moving with the same quiet economy she remembered. 5 years had added lines around his eyes, a thread or two of silver in his black hair, but otherwise he seemed unchanged, as if the desert had preserved him like the ancient ruins scattered throughout the territory. Clara, he said simply, as if 5 years hadn't passed, as if her heart wasn't racing at the sight of him. Elias. She was proud that her voice remained steady. What brings you to Silver Creek? His dark eyes flicked past her to where Henry stood in the doorway, then back to her face. A warning, and perhaps other things. Miss Mitchell? Henry had emerged, positioning himself slightly between Clara and Elias. Is everything all right? Yes, of course. Henry Westbrook. This is Elias Redhawk, an old friend. The words felt inadequate. Elias, mister. Westbrook is a lawyer here in town. The two men assessed each other with the instinctive wariness of rivals. Henry extended his hand after a moment's hesitation. Any friend of Miss Mitchell's is welcome here. Elias shook hands briefly. Lawyer, good. She may need one. Clara's blood chilled. What do you mean? Not here. Too many years. He glanced around the busy street. Is there somewhere we can talk? My shop. I think my office would be more appropriate. Henry interjected smoothly. Whatever legal matter Mr. Redhawk is referring to, privacy would be advisable. Clara saw Elias's jaw tighten slightly, but he nodded. They made an odd procession walking down Main Street. Clara in a respectable shopkeeper's dress, Henry in his city suit, and Elias in worn trail clothes that spoke of long miles traveled. Henry's office occupied the second floor of the bank building, all polished wood and leather-bound books. He gestured them to chairs, positioning himself behind his desk in what Clara recognized as a power play. Now then, Henry said, what's this about Miss Mitchell needing legal assistance? Elias ignored him, focusing on Clara. Jake Thornton was released from prison last month. The words hit Clara like a physical blow. Prison? But I heard he'd left the territory. He did. After you disappeared. After the law wouldn't act. Others did. Elias's expression gave nothing away. Evidence appeared. Witnesses came forward. He was convicted of cattle rustling, fraud, served 5 years in Yuma. Clara's mind raced. Others acted? You mean you? I mean justice found its way, Elias said evenly. But now he's free, and asking questions about Samuel Mitchell's daughter. After 5 years? Henry leaned forward. Surely whatever grievance he had, prison changes some men. Elias cut him off. Makes them let go of old anger. Others, it lets that anger ferment, grow stronger. Thornton blames Clara for his downfall. Says if she hadn't run, hadn't made him chase her, none of it would have happened. That's insane, Clara breathed. Yes, but insane men are often the most dangerous. Elias pulled a folded paper from his vest. 3 days ago, he was seen in Tularosa, drinking and talking about unfinished business. Yesterday, a man matching his description asked about you in White Oaks. How do you know all this? Henry demanded. Elias's gaze never left Clara. I have been watching, as I said I would. The weight of those words settled over the room. 5 years of silence. But he'd been there all along. A guardian shadow she'd never seen. Watching. Henry repeated, his tone sharp. And what gives you the right? Henry, please. Clara raised a hand. Elias saved my life once. If he says there's danger, I believe him. She saw the flash of hurt in Henry's eyes, the realization that there was history here he didn't understand. But he rallied, the lawyer in him taking over. If Thornton is making threats, we can seek legal protection, a restraining order, perhaps alert the local sheriff. Elias made a sound that might have been a laugh. Paper against a man who spent 5 years planning revenge? The law has more teeth than it did 5 years ago, Henry said stiffly. This isn't the wild frontier anymore. Tell that to the men still dying over water rights and mining claims. Elias stood abruptly. Clara, you need protection. Real protection, not legal documents. And I suppose you're offering to provide that? Henry rose as well, the two men facing off across the desk. Stop. Clara stood between them. Both of you, I'm not a prize to be fought over or a child to be protected without consultation. She turned to Elias. Thank you for the warning. I need time to think about what to do. Time is what you don't have, Elias said urgently. He's maybe 2 days behind me, less if he pushes hard. Then we have tonight to plan. She moved toward the door. Henry, thank you for the use of your office. Elias, walk with me. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Clara led the way toward her shop, acutely aware of Elias's presence beside her. 5 years melted away, and she was back in the desert, trusting this man with her life. You built something good here, he said quietly. I've been watching, but also proud. You survived, thrived. No thanks to you, she said, surprised by the bitterness in her voice. You left without a word. With a word, I said be strong. That's not the same as goodbye. He stopped walking, and she turned to face him. In the dying light, she could see something raw in his expression. If I had said goodbye, I would not have been able to leave, and you needed to build your life without shadows. Did I, or did you decide that for me? Before he could answer, a commotion erupted from the saloon down the street. Men spilled out onto the sidewalk, voices raised in anger or excitement. Clara caught fragments. Stranger, asking about the dress shop. Gun. Elias's hand went to his weapon. Inside. Now. They ducked into her shop, Elias immediately moving to peer through the window. Clara's hands shook as she lit the lamps. Is it him? Can't tell. Stay back. The shop door burst open. Clara gasped, but it was Henry, breathing hard. There's a man in the saloon, rough-looking, been drinking. He's asking about you. Clara, saying things. Henry's face flushed. Improper things. Thornton? Elias asked. Matches the description. The sheriff's trying to calm things down, but a gunshot split the night. Then another. Shouts and running feet. Elias pushed Clara behind the counter. Both of you, stay down. We should get the sheriff. Henry protested. The sheriff's busy. Elias checked his rifle. And this isn't his fight. It's not yours either, Clara said desperately. Not anymore. Elias looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw 5 years of distance collapse into nothing. It was always my fight, he said simply. From the moment I found you in the desert. He slipped out the back door before she could respond. Clara started to follow, but Henry caught her arm. Let the law handle this, he pleaded. That's what civilization is for. Through the window, she could see men scattering, taking cover. The sheriff's voice rose above the chaos, trying to restore order. And somewhere out there, 2 men who'd been on a collision course for 5 years were finally about to meet. Civilization, Clara said softly, gently removing Henry's hand. My father believed in civilization. It got him killed. She went to her sewing table, reached underneath, and pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. Henry's eyes widened as she revealed the Colt .45 her father had taught her to shoot. Clara, what are you doing? Something I should have done 5 years ago. She checked the cylinder, hands steady now, standing and fighting instead of running. This is madness. You're not a gunfighter. You're a respectable woman, a business owner. I'm Samuel Mitchell's daughter, she said firmly. And I'm done hiding from his killer. Another gunshot. Closer now. Through the window. She glimpsed Elias moving through the shadows, circling toward the saloon. Her protector still, even after all these years. Stay here, Henry, she said, moving toward the door. This isn't your fight either. Clara, wait, but she was already gone. Stepping out into the chaos of the street, the stars were just beginning to appear overhead, and somewhere in the darkness, her past and future were about to collide. The desert wind kicked up, carrying the scent of sage and gunpowder. It felt like coming home. The Red Rock Canyon lay 15 miles west of Silver Creek, a place where ancient waters had carved deep channels through stone, creating a labyrinth of shadows and secrets. Clara had discovered it during her early days in the area, when memories of flight still haunted her dreams and she needed space to breathe, to remember who she was becoming. Now she sat with Elias in a hidden grotto, their horses tethered nearby, a small fire crackling between them. The events of the previous night hung heavy in the air, the confrontation in the street. Shots fired. Jake Thornton wounded but escaped into the darkness with his remaining men. You shouldn't have come out, Elias said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since their dawn flight from town. I had it handled, like you've been handling things for 5 years? From the shadows? Clara poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. I'm tired of being protected. Elias, tired of running. And Henry Westbrook, is he tired of running too? There was an edge to Elias's voice she'd never heard before. Henry is a good man. That wasn't what I asked. Clara looked up, meeting his dark gaze across the flames. What right do you have to ask anything? You left, no explanation, no word for 5 years except reports of your watching. Did you expect me to wait? To live like a nun while you played guardian angel? I expected you to live, he said simply. To be safe. Happy. Happy. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Do you know what happiness is, Elias? It's not just absence of danger. It's not just being safe. She struggled for words. It's connection. It's choosing to be with someone, not being chosen for its partnership, not protection. Elias was quiet for a long moment, studying the fire. When he spoke, his voice was low, careful. My grandmother used to say that some people are like desert plants. They grow best alone, needing little water, asking nothing from the soil around them. Others are like cottonwoods. They need deep roots, community, the constant flow of water to thrive. And which are you? I thought I was the desert plant, until I met you. He looked up then, and Clara's breath caught at the raw emotion in his eyes. 5 years. Clara, 5 years of tracking, scouting, living the only life I knew, and every sunset. I wondered what you were doing. Every sunrise, I had to stop myself from riding to Silver Creek. Then why didn't you? Because you were building something. Because Henry Westbrook could give you what I couldn't, respectability, stability, a life in the light instead of the shadows. He stood abruptly, pacing to the edge of the firelight. Because I loved you too much to condemn you to life with a half-breed tracker who owns nothing but a horse and gun. The word hung between them. Love. Neither had spoken it before, not during their desperate flight years ago, not in the careful letters he'd never sent and she'd never received. You loved me, Clara said softly. So you decided my life for me, made my choices without asking what I wanted. What did you want? He turned back, his face half in shadow. A proper proposal? A wedding in a church where half the congregation would whisper about your choice? Children who would be called names in school? Clara stood, anger flashing through her. I wanted the choice. I wanted to decide for myself whether love was worth the whispers, whether partnership with someone who understood me was better than safety with someone who saw only what he wanted me to be. And Henry Westbrook, he understands you. He tries. He's kind, patient. He offers me everything a woman should want, but not what you do want. It wasn't a question. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, frustration and longing warring in her chest. How would you know what I want? You never asked. Elias moved then, swift as he'd always been, until he stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Then I'm asking now, what do you want? Clara Mitchell? The firelight danced across his features, highlighting the planes and angles she'd memorized during those desperate days in the desert. This man who'd saved her life, who'd spent 5 years as her invisible protector, who'd walked away rather than impose his presence on her chosen life. She took a breath, steadying herself. I want to stop being afraid, not of Thornton or men like him. I learned to handle that fear, but afraid of wanting things that don't fit the proper mold, afraid of choosing a harder path because it's the one that calls to my soul. And what path is that? Instead of answering with words, Clara closed the distance between them. The kiss was nothing like what poets described. It was desperate, angry. 5 years of separation and misunderstanding poured into a single moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. That path, she whispered. Elias cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. Clara, no! She pulled back. No more decisions made for my own good. No more noble sacrifices. If you want me, say it. If you're going to leave again, say that too, but no more shadows. Elias, I need truth. He studied her for a long moment, and she saw him make a decision, saw walls crumble that had stood for 5 years. Truth, he said. The truth is, I've loved you since that night in the desert when you trusted me with your life. The truth is, I left because I was afraid, not of Thornton or danger, but of wanting something I'd never thought possible, a home, a partnership, someone who looked at me and saw not the color of my skin or the mixed blood in my veins, but just me. Elias. The truth is, I came back not just because Thornton was free, but because I couldn't stay away any longer. 5 years of distance, and I still wake reaching for you. Still plan conversations we'll never have. Still imagine. He stopped, swallowing hard. Imagine what? A life. Not in town where you'd face censure for your choice, but not hiding either. Maybe a small ranch somewhere between worlds, like we are. Horses, cattle, a garden, children who grow up knowing both worlds, strong in their mixed heritage. Foolish dreams for a man with nothing to offer, but Clara silenced him with another kiss, softer this time, full of promise rather than desperation. Not foolish, she said against his lips. And you're wrong about having nothing to offer. You offer yourself. That's all I ever wanted. They sat together by the fire as the moon rose, planning not just for the immediate threat of Thornton, but for something larger, a future neither had dared imagine alone. He'll come here, Clara said eventually. Thornton. Someone in town will tell him about my refuge, and he'll come. Let him. Elias checked his rifle with practiced efficiency. Better to face him on ground we choose than to keep running. We. Clara smiled at the word. I like the sound of that. No more facing things alone. Elias agreed. For either of us. They prepared through the night, setting up positions, planning fields of fire. Clara felt strangely calm, as if the past 5 years had been preparation for this moment. No more running, no more hiding, just standing ground with the man she loved beside her. As dawn approached, painting the red rocks in shades of gold and crimson, Elias showed her something he'd carved during his watching years, a piece of turquoise shaped into a small bird. My grandmother's design, he explained. The bird that flies between earth and sky, belonging fully to neither but essential to both. He pressed it into her hand. I made it the night after I left you in the mountains, carried it ever since, waiting for the courage to give it to you. Clara closed her fingers around the stone, feeling its smooth warmth. And now? Now I think we both have learned that courage isn't about facing danger. It's about facing truth, speaking it, living it. The sound of approaching horses ended the moment. 3 riders, moving carelessly, confident in their numbers and weapons. Clara recognized Thornton immediately. Prison had aged him, turned his meanness into something harder, more focused. Positions, Elias murmured, but Clara caught his arm. Together, she said firmly. We face him together. He nodded, understanding. They stood side by side as the riders entered the canyon. No longer predator and prey, but two people defending their right to choose their own path. Well, well, Thornton called out, reining up his horse. Clara Mitchell, and her breed protector. How touching. Jake Thornton, Clara replied, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. You killed my father. You destroyed my home. What more could you possibly want? Justice, he snarled. 5 years in Yuma because of you. 5 years of hell because you couldn't accept the natural order of things. The natural order being you stealing land and murdering those who resist. The natural order being the strong take from the weak. Your father was weak. You're weak. And that half-blood beside you is an abomination that... The gunshot echoed through the canyon, but it wasn't from Thornton's gun, or Elias's. Clara stood with her father's Colt steady in her hand, smoke wisping from the barrel. Thornton's gun spun away into the dust, his hand bloodied. The weak? Clara asked conversationally. My father taught me to shoot when I was 12, said a woman should be able to defend what's hers. Took me 5 years to understand he meant more than just land or cattle. Thornton's men reached for their weapons, but Elias's rifle was already trained on them. I wouldn't, he said mildly. The lady's made her point. Question is whether you're smart enough to understand it. This isn't over, Thornton gasped, clutching his wounded hand. Yes, it is. Clara stepped forward, keeping her gun level. You can ride away now. Leave the territory. Never return, or you can keep pursuing a vendetta that's already cost you 5 years. Choose. She saw the moment Thornton recognized the steel in her, the moment he understood that the frightened girl who'd fled into the desert was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd found her strength, her purpose, her partner. This isn't justice, he spat. No, Clara agreed. Justice would be you hanging for my father's murder. This is mercy. More than you showed him. Thornton's men helped him mount, his face twisted with pain and rage. As they turned to leave, he looked back one last time. You'll regret this, both of you. The world doesn't accept what you are, what you're choosing. The world changes, Elias said quietly. Sometimes one choice at a time. They watched the riders disappear into the desert, then stood in silence as the sun climbed higher, warming the red rocks around them. It's not over, Clara said eventually. He's right about the world. There will be consequences for this choice. There always are. Elias took her hand, intertwining their fingers. But we face them together now. Clara looked down at their joined hands, his dark, hers pale, different but fitted perfectly together, like the bird carved from turquoise, flying between two worlds, belonging to both and neither. Together, she agreed, and knew that whatever came next, she was finally, truly home. The desert had always been a harsh teacher, but in the weeks following their confrontation with Thornton, it became Clara's university. She and Elias moved like ghosts through the borderlands, staying ahead of any pursuit while she learned the skills that had kept him alive all these years. Water is here, Elias said, kneeling beside what looked like barren rock. He showed her the subtle signs, a slight discoloration in the stone, the way certain plants grew nearby, the pattern of animal tracks converging. The desert hides its treasures, but it always leaves clues. Clara mimicked his position, running her fingers over the rock face until she felt the slight dampness he'd detected. It seemed impossible that water could exist in such a dry place, but when Elias dug with his knife, a small seep appeared. My turn, she said, scanning the area. After a moment, she pointed to a cluster of brittlebush. There, the flowers are fuller on that side, and see how the quail tracks circle back? His smile was reward enough. You learn quickly. They were camped in a maze of slot canyons, the kind of place where sound played tricks and a dozen men could hide within shouting distance of each other. It had been 2 weeks since they'd left the Red Rock Canyon, 2 weeks of constant movement, teaching, learning, and slowly building the partnership they'd both craved. "Show me again," Clara said, gesturing to the rifle he'd been cleaning. Elias handed it over, watching as she broke it down with increasing confidence. Her hands, once soft from years of needlework, now bore calluses from rope and reins. The sun had darkened her skin, and she'd taken to wearing men's clothing for practicality. Split skirts were useless when scrambling over rocks or mounting a horse in a hurry. "You're different," he observed as she reassembled the weapon. "Disappointed?" "No. Seeing who you were always meant to be." He paused. "Your father would be proud." The mention of Samuel Mitchell brought the familiar ache. "He taught me to be strong. You're teaching me to survive. There's a difference." "Is there?" Before Clara could answer, the horses stirred restlessly. Elias was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, melting into the shadows. Clara grabbed her own weapon and found cover behind a boulder, marveling at how natural the movements had become. A roadrunner burst from the brush, chasing a lizard, and the horses settled. False alarm. But good practice. Elias emerged from his position, nodding approval at her choice of cover. "We can't keep running forever," Clara said as they relaxed. "Thornton may have retreated, but there'll be others. There always are." Then we stop running. Elias gazed out over the desert. "There's land to the south, near the Gila River, rough country, but good water, decent grazing, far enough from the settlements to avoid trouble, close enough to trade when needed." "You've thought about this?" "For 5 years. He glanced at her. "A man can dream, even when he thinks dreams are foolish." That night, they encountered their first real test. A flash flood, born from storms miles away, came roaring down the canyon with almost no warning. The wall of water, filled with debris and fury, would have caught them if not for Elias's instincts. "Move!" he shouted, grabbing Clara's arm and pulling her toward higher ground. They scrambled up the rocky slope, horses whinnying in panic as they fought to keep their footing. Clara's boot slipped on loose stone, and for a terrifying moment she dangled over the churning water. Elias's hand clamped around her wrist like iron, hauling her to safety just as the flood swept through their former campsite. They huddled on a narrow ledge, pressed against the canyon wall, watching their supplies tumble away in the torrent. The horses had made it to safety, but barely. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized how close death had come. "The desert's lesson for today," Elias said, his arm tight around her. "Never camp in a wash, no matter how dry it looks." "Noted," Clara managed, trying for lightness despite her shaking hands. The flood passed as quickly as it had come, leaving behind a transformed landscape. Their campsite was gone, along with most of their food and half their ammunition. They climbed down carefully, salvaging what they could from the mud and debris. "We'll need supplies," Clara said, wringing water from a salvaged blanket. "There's a trading post 2 days north, run by a Mexican family. They ask no questions." Elias studied the sky. "More storms coming. We should find better shelter." They spent the night in a cave halfway up the canyon wall, sharing their single remaining blanket while the horses stood guard below. The temperature dropped sharply, and Clara found herself pressed against Elias for warmth, no longer shy about the intimacy born of necessity. "Tell me about this land near the Gila," she said softly. "It belonged to an old Apache fighter named Tom Brennan. Married into my grandmother's clan. Lived between worlds like us. He died last winter. No heirs. The land's unclaimed, far as I know. And we could claim it. Would take money, filing fees, proving up requirements, and there'd be those who'd object to—" He hesitated. "To a mixed-blood man and a white woman living as equals?" Clara finished. "Let them object. I'm tired of caring what the world thinks." Elias pulled her closer. "Brave words, but living them is harder. Then we'll learn that too. Like tracking water, reading weather signs, just another survival skill." The next morning brought new challenges. Elias's sharp eyes spotted dust clouds to the east riders, moving with purpose, whether they were Thornton's men random bandits or innocent travelers. Prudence demanded avoidance. They took a harder route, leading the horses up treacherous switchbacks that gained altitude quickly. Clara's lungs burned in the thin air, but she didn't complain. Each step higher meant better vantage points, more options for escape or defense. There, Elias pointed to a distant speck. The trading post. It looked impossibly far, a tiny collection of buildings shimmering in the heat haze. But Clara had learned to trust desert distances. What seemed near could be days away, while what appeared unreachable might be gained by nightfall. They descended carefully, using a route that kept them hidden from the main trails. By late afternoon, they'd circled wide around the riders' probable path. The trading post grew larger, more real adobe walls. A corral, smoke rising from chimneys. Stay alert, Elias warned. Trading posts attract all kinds. The proprietor, a weathered man named Sebastian Morales, greeted Elias with recognition, if not quite warmth. His eyes lingered on Clara, taking in her trail-worn appearance and the way she kept her hand near her gun. Senor Redhawk, it's been years. His English carried a heavy accent. And Senora. Mitchell, Clara said firmly. We need supplies, food, ammunition, grain for the horses. Morales nodded slowly. Of course, though prices have risen, the Apache troubles. You understand. They dickered over costs while his wife, a silent woman with knowing eyes, brought them water and tortillas. Clara noticed how the woman watched them, saw something that made her nod approvingly. You go to the Gila lands, Morales said as they loaded their purchases. It wasn't a question. Perhaps, Elias replied carefully. Is good land, needs strong people who understand both worlds. He glanced between them. My cousin in Tucson, he files land claims. Honest man, I write you letter of introduction. It was more than they'd hoped for. Clara felt a flutter of possibility. Perhaps their dream wasn't as far-fetched as it seemed. They camped that night in sight of the trading post's lights, far enough for privacy, but close enough for the illusion of civilization. Clara practiced her newfound skills, building a fire that burned hot with little smoke, preparing a simple meal from their supplies. We make a good team, she said, watching Elias tend the horses. Yes, he joined her by the fire, though Henry Westbrook would say you're wasting your talents on rough living. Clara heard the question beneath the words. Henry wants a wife to display in his perfect life. You want a partner to build an imperfect one, which sounds like waste to you. When you put it that way, she leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. I made my choice in that canyon. Elia, every blister, every cold night, every moment of fear or discomfort since has only confirmed it. This is hard, yes, but it's also real, true. I've never felt more myself, even when the desert tries to kill us, especially then, because we survive it together. A coyote called in the distance, answered by another, then another, a chorus that no longer frightened her. The desert was speaking, and she was learning its language. Tomorrow we start for the Gila, Elias said. 3 days if we push hard. Then we see if Brennan's land is still unclaimed. If Morales' cousin is as honest as promised. If we can truly build something from nothing but determination. We've built this. Clara gestured to their small camp, their partnership, their growing understanding. Everything else is just details. He kissed her then, under stars that seemed close enough to touch. It was a promise without words, of shared trials and triumphs, of a life carved from an unforgiving landscape by two people who'd found in each other the strength to stop running. When they finally pulled apart, Clara noticed something on the horizon, a falling star, blazing bright before disappearing. Make a wish, she said, though she found she had nothing left to wish for. Everything she wanted was right here, in this moment, in this vast desert that had transformed from prison to possibility. No need, Elias echoed her thoughts. Some things are better than wishes. They're choices, made real by living them. They sat together as the fire burned low, planning and dreaming in equal measure. The Gila lands waited. along with all the challenges of claiming them. There would be paperwork and prejudice, hard work and harder judgments. But tonight, none of that mattered. What mattered was the quiet understanding between them, the skills shared and learned, the partnership forged in flight and tempered by choice. The desert had taught them both its hardest lesson, that survival alone wasn't enough. True strength came from finding someone worth surviving with, worth building with, worth facing the world's disapproval for. Tomorrow would bring the next stage of their journey. Tonight, they had everything they needed, each other, the vast sky above, and the certainty that whatever came next, they would meet it as they'd learned to meet everything else, together. The approach to Devil's Canyon came at dusk, the dying light painting the narrow passage in shades of blood and shadow. Clara felt the horse's nervousness, ears flicking, muscles tense beneath their riders. Even Desert Rose's successor, the sturdy black stallion Elias now rode, showed signs of unease. "This is it," Elias said quietly, studying the canyon entrance. "Once we enter, there's no quick escape. The walls narrow for half a mile before opening to the valley where Brennan's claim lies." Clara checked her rifle for the dozenth time. They'd been tracking Thornton's band for 2 days, following signs of hasty movement, discarded supplies, and increasingly desperate attempts to cover their trail. The confrontation that had been brewing for weeks would happen here, in this slice of hell carved from ancient stone. "How many?" she asked. 6, maybe 7. Thornton, the Wallace brothers, few others. Elias dismounted, running his hand along the rock face. "They passed through maybe 3 hours ago. See the fresh scrapes from horseshoes? Moving fast but tired. They know we're following." "Yes, and they know this canyon. It's a trap, but not the way they think." Clara heard the edge in his voice, the hunter's anticipation mixed with something deeper. In the weeks since they'd filed their claim on Brennan's land. Now, officially, the Mitchell Red Hawk Ranch, Thornton, had escalated from threats to action. Poisoned waterholes, scattered cattle, and finally the attempt to burn their half-built cabin had pushed them to this moment. "Tell me the plan again," Clara said, though she knew it by heart. "They'll ford up at Widow's Rest. That's the wide spot halfway through where the old stage line used to change horses. Good defensive position, but they're thinking like men who expect a frontal assault." He pointed to the canyon rim. "There's an Apache trail along the top. Dangerous in full daylight. Near suicide at night, but possible if you know where to step. And you want me to take it alone. You're lighter, better at climbing now. I'll give you 30 minutes, then enter the canyon loud enough to draw their attention. When they focus on me, I rain justice from above." Clara tried for lightness, but heard the tremor in her voice. Elias gripped her shoulders. "If something goes wrong, if there are more than we thought, you fade back. Promise me. We don't make promises we can't keep. Remember?" His jaw tightened, but he knew better than to argue. They'd learned each other's stubbornness these past months. The steel beneath Clara's newfound skills and the protective instinct Elias couldn't quite shake. Clara left her horse tethered with his and began the climb. The first 100 feet were manageable, handholds worn by centuries of use, the dying light still sufficient to show the way. But as full darkness fell and the trail became a mere suggestion along the cliff face, every step required total concentration. Wind howled through the canyon, threatening to pluck her from the narrow ledge. Her rifle, slung across her back, caught on protruding rocks. More than once. Pebbles cascaded into the void, and she pressed herself against the stone, heart hammering, waiting to see if the sound would bring investigation. 20 minutes in, her hands were bloody from sharp rock, her legs shaking with effort, but she could see Widow's Rest below campfire light revealing figures moving in the ruins of the old stage station. She counted 6 men, saw Thornton's distinctive hat, the Wallace brothers' bulk. They'd posted 1 guard, but he watched the canyon entrance, not the rim above. Clara found a stable position behind a cluster of boulders just as she heard Elias enter the canyon. He made no attempt at stealth whistling that Apache melody she'd come to love, his horse's hooves ringing against stone. The bait, perfectly played. Redhawk, Thornton's voice echoed off the walls. That you, Breed? Come to die with your woman? Just passing through, Elias called back, still advancing. Heard you boys were having trouble finding your way home. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes strobing in the darkness. Elias had taken cover. She could see his position behind a fallen boulder, returning fire methodically. The gang members spread out, trying to flank him, focused entirely on the threat they could see. Clara steadied her rifle on the rocks, picking her targets carefully. The guard first, he was closest to discovering Elias's vulnerability. Her shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him into the darkness. Before the others could react, she'd shifted position, found Ben Wallace in her sights. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Squeeze, don't pull. Let the breath go halfway out. Make the rifle part of you. The shot was clean. Ben Wallace crumpled, his brother's anguished cry cutting through the gunfire. Clara was already moving, scrambling along the rim as bullets whined off the rocks where she'd been. Above, someone shouted. There's another shooter above. The battle became chaos. Thornton's men, caught between Elias's steady fire and Clara's commanding position, scrambled for better cover. She saw Elias advance, using their confusion, closing the distance with deadly purpose. Tom Wallace, wild with grief and rage, made a fatal error. He broke cover, charging toward Elias's position with a roar. Clara and Elias fired simultaneously, their bullets finding their mark. Wallace tumbled into the dust. Still, just you and two others now. Thornton, Elias called out. Those boys weren't worth dying for. Clara tracked movement below, saw one of the remaining men trying to reach the horses. Her shot kicked up dust at his feet, sending him diving back to cover. She was getting better at this, the rifle feeling natural in her hands, the calculation of wind and distance becoming instinct. But Thornton was clever, a survivor of too many fights. She saw him moving, using the deeper shadows, working toward a position that would give him a clear shot at Elias. Her angle was bad, too many obstacles between them. Elias, your left, she shouted, abandoning concealment. Thornton's rifle swung up toward her voice, and Clara felt the bullet pass close enough to tug at her hair. She rolled behind meager cover as splinters of rock peppered her face. When she looked again, Thornton had vanished into a gap between buildings. The remaining outlaw made a break for it, spurring his horse down the canyon. Neither Clara nor Elias wasted ammunition on his fleeing back. One enemy running was better than facing him here. Where's Thornton? Clara called. Working his way to you. Elias responded. He knows the old paths. Clara, get back. But it was too late. She heard the scrape of boot on stone behind her, spun to find Thornton emerging from a cleft in the rocks she hadn't even seen. His rifle was aimed at her chest, his face twisted with hatred in the moonlight. Should have stayed in your dress shop, he snarled. Should have taken that lawyer's offer and lived quiet. But no, you had to take up with this mongrel, had to keep pushing. Clara's rifle was pointed too low. No time to raise it before he fired. But her father had taught her more than one lesson. The Colt at her hip came out smooth and fast, muscle memory from 1,000 practice draws. The two shots sounded as one. Clara felt the burn across her ribs as Thornton's bullet creased her side, but her shot had been true. Thornton stood for a moment, looking surprised, then toppled backward into the canyon's depths. She sank to her knees, hand pressed to her side, warm blood seeping between her fingers. The world tilted strangely, and she wondered if this was how her father had felt in his final moments. Clara? Elias's voice, closer than seemed possible. He must have scaled the cliff like a man possessed. His hands replaced hers on the wound, professionally assessing. Through and through, missed the vitals. You'll live. Thornton? Gone. It's over. She laughed weakly. You mean I finally get to stop practicing my quick draw? Never. He was already binding the wound with strips torn from his shirt. A rancher needs all the skills she can get, especially one planning to raise horses and children in Apache country. Children? The words slipped out through the pain and exhaustion. Elias's hand stilled for a moment. That is, when you're ready, If you want. The uncertainty in his voice, this man who faced death without flinching, made her heart twist. I want, she said simply. Everything. The ranch, the horses, children who'll grow up knowing both worlds, all of it. He kissed her forehead gently. Then you'll have it. But first, we get you down from this mountain and properly doctored. The descent was a blur of controlled pain and careful movement. Elias had somehow brought both horses up the canyon, and he lifted Clara into the saddle as if she weighed nothing. She leaned against him as they rode, letting his strength keep her upright. The sheriff will have questions, she said as they emerged from the canyon. Let him ask. Self-defense is still legal, even for breeds and unmarried women living in sin. There was a humor in his voice now. The tension of the hunt finally released. Living in partnership, Clara corrected. Though I suppose we should make it official. Can't have our children born to scandal. Clara Mitchell, is that a proposal? Someone has to make an honest man of you. Dawn was breaking as they created a rise, revealing their valley spread below. The half-built cabin looked like a promise in the golden light, the creek glinting silver through the cottonwoods they'd planted. It wasn't much yet. Some claimed land, basic structures, a dream given form. But it was theirs. My shadow still follows you, Elias said softly. Always will. Clara twisted carefully to look at him. This man who'd saved her, taught her, stood beside her against all odds. Good, because mine follows you too. That's what partners do, cast shadows together, make them stronger. They rode down into their valley as the sun climbed higher, wounds to tend and work to do, but no longer running. The desert had tested them with wind and water, blood and choices. They'd passed every test, together, behind them. Devil's Canyon stood silent, keeping its secrets. Ahead lay years of building, of facing down prejudice and weather, of creating something new in a land that respected only strength and determination. Clara had both now, and more. She had found her true self in the crucible of survival, had chosen love over safety, partnership over propriety. Her father would have understood. In the end, the land didn't care about bloodlines or social conventions. It cared about courage, work, and the bonds between people strong enough to stand against whatever came. As they reached their cabin, Elias helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist. Welcome home, Mrs. Soon-to-be Redhawk. Welcome home, Mr. Mitchell Redhawk, she countered, leaning into his strength. He laughed, the sound rich and free in the morning air. You're going to be trouble, aren't you? Always, Clara promised, and sealed it with a kiss as their shadows merged in the rising sun. Inseparable at last, the morning sun painted their valley in shades of gold and promise, transforming the simple ranch into something that looked like hope itself. Clara stood on the porch they'd built together, her hand resting on the rough-hewn railing, watching Elias work with a young Mustang in the corral. 3 years had passed since Devil's Canyon. 3 years of building, growing, becoming. The wound from that night had healed into a thin scar along her ribs, a reminder of choices made and prices paid. But the deeper wounds, the loss of her father, the years of running, those had healed too. Slowly, in the patient way the desert teaches all things to heal. Mama, look! Their daughter, Sarah, barely 2 years old, toddled across the porch with a handful of wildflowers. Her skin was golden bronze, her hair black as her father's, but with her mother's waves. Her eyes that fascinating gray-green that seemed to shift with the light. Beautiful, little one, Clara said, kneeling to accept the bouquet. Shall we put them in water for Papa to see? Sarah nodded solemnly, then broke into giggles as one of the ranch dogs licked her face. She was fearless, this child of 2 worlds, as comfortable in the desert as she was in the house. Already she showed signs of her father's gift for reading the land, her mother's steel beneath the sweetness. The sound of approaching horses drew Clara's attention. 2 riders coming from the east, and she recognized them even at a distance. Sebastian Morales from the trading post and surprisingly, Henry Westbrook. "Elias," she called. "Company coming." He left the Mustang with a final gentle word, joining her on the porch with Sarah on his shoulders. They made a striking picture, the tracker who'd become a respected rancher, the woman who'd chosen her own path, the child who represented a future neither had dared imagine. "Señor Red Hawk, Señora," Morales greeted them warmly as he dismounted. "And little Sarah, más bonita cada día." Henry's greeting was more reserved, but genuine. The years had been kind to him. His law practice thrived. He'd married a banker's daughter from Santa Fe, and if he still carried a torch for Clara, he hid it well. "What brings you gentlemen out here?" Elias asked. Though his tone was friendly, old wariness died hard. "Business," Morales said. "Good business. The Army needs horses. Many horses. They know your reputation for training mounts that can handle rough country. I told them I would speak to you. And I'm here," Henry added, "because the contract would be substantial. You'd need legal representation to ensure fair terms." Clara and Elias exchanged glances. They'd been getting by, selling horses to local ranchers, trading with the Apache bands that still moved through the territory. But an Army contract would mean stability, growth, a legacy to leave their children. Children? Henry had noticed Clara's hand on her belly, the subtle protective gesture she'd been making lately. "Due in autumn," she confirmed, smiling at the way Elias's face softened whenever they spoke of it. Another rider for the desert. They conducted business on the porch, Sarah playing at their feet with the patient dogs. The terms were good, better than good. The Army needed quality over quantity. Horses that could survive in country that killed lesser mounts. It was what Elias had been breeding for, combining Apache ponies' endurance with thoroughbred strength. "There's one condition," Henry said carefully. "The contract needs both your signatures. The Army, they've become more modern in their thinking. They recognize that the ranch is a joint enterprise." Clara felt her throat tighten. Such simple words, but they represented so much. Acceptance, respect, acknowledgement of the partnership she and Elias had built despite all opposition. "Then we'll both sign," she said firmly. As the men prepared to leave, Henry lingered. "Clara, might I have a word?" They walked a little apart, toward the garden she'd coaxed from the desert soil. Corn and beans grew in the old way. The Three Sisters method an Apache neighbor had taught her, with chilies and herbs bordering the plots. "I wanted to apologize," Henry said quietly. 3 years ago, I thought I knew what was best for you. I offered safety, respectability, a life that fit the rules." He gestured at the thriving ranch, the integrated operation that worked with the land rather than against it. "I see now that you needed something else entirely. You needed to be free to become this. You're a good man. Henry, you'll make someone very happy. Margaret and I are well suited, but seeing you here, seeing what you and Red Hawk have built," he shook his head. "It's humbling. You followed your heart against all convention and created something remarkable." "We followed the desert," Clara corrected gently. "It taught us that boundaries are just lines men draw on maps. Real life flows like water, finding its own course." After the visitors left, Clara and Elias sat on their porch as evening approached. Sarah dozed in her father's arms, worn out from the day's adventures. The desert stretched endlessly before them, but it no longer seemed hostile. It was home, an Army contract. Elias mused. "My grandmother would laugh. Her grandson, selling horses to the same soldiers who once hunted her people. Times change," Clara said. "We're proof of that. Some things don't change." He reached over, taking her hand. "My shadow still follows you. And mine follows you." She squeezed his fingers. "Though I think we cast one shadow now, not two." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. In the corral, the horses settled for the night. From somewhere in the distance came the call of a coyote, answered by another, the desert's evening song. Clara thought of her father, wondered what he would make of this life she'd chosen. Would he understand the trades she'd made? Respectability for authenticity, safety for partnership, the known for the unknown. She thought he would. Samuel Mitchell had come west seeking something new, had married across cultural lines himself. He'd raised his daughter to be strong, and she'd used that strength to build something he could never have imagined. "What are you thinking?" Elias asked. "About shadows." Clara said, "How that first night, you said yours would follow me for years. I was so frightened then, running from death, from men who saw me as an obstacle to their greed. I thought your shadow was just another thing hunting me. And now? Now I know shadows can be shelter, protection, the shade that lets life flourish in the desert." She turned to face him. "You gave me more than safety that night. Elias, you gave me the chance to discover who I really was." "You discovered that yourself. I just kept the wolves at bay while you did." Sarah stirred, mumbling something in the mix of English, Spanish, and Apache that was becoming her unique language. Soon there would be another child learning those tongues, another small person growing up between worlds, making them bridges instead of barriers. "The wolves are gone now?" Clara said. "Thornton, the fear, the running, all gone. New wolves will come. They always do. Then we'll face them, together, with our children beside us and our shadows intertwined." She stood, stretching. "Come. Sarah needs her bed, and we have an early morning. Those army horses won't train themselves." As they moved inside their home, larger now, with real glass windows and wooden floors, but still simple, still honest. Clara paused at the threshold. The last light of day caught the turquoise bird Elias had carved for her, now hanging above the door, a bird flying between earth and sky, belonging to both and neither, like them. "No more running," Elias said, understanding her pause. "Let's build what they tried to destroy." "We have," Clara said. "We are, every day." Inside, their home was warm with lamplight and the lingering sense of dinner. Sarah barely woke as they tucked her into the small bed Elias had crafted with his own hands. Looking down at their daughter, Clara saw the future, not just for their family, but for a territory, a nation slowly learning that strength came in many forms, that borders existed to be crossed by those brave enough to see beyond them. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The army contract to negotiate, horses to train, a ranch to run while pregnant. There would be those who still whispered about the mixed-blood rancher and his white wife, those who couldn't understand the choice they'd made. But tonight, none of that mattered. What mattered was this: a family formed from flight, a home built on contested ground, love that had survived pursuit and prejudice to bloom like the desert roses Clara cultivated near the porch. His shadow followed her for years. Clara murmured, the old words taking on new meaning, "and will follow for years more." Elias completed, drawing her close. "Yours and mine and theirs, all woven together like the patterns in my grandmother's blankets." Outside, the moon rose over their valley, silver light transforming the landscape once more. In the corral, horses stood quietly, heads together. In the garden, night-blooming plants opened to share their perfume with the darkness. And in the house that love built, a family settled into sleep. Their shadows merged into one. The desert kept its watch, ancient and patient, holding in its vast silence the story of two people who'd refused to let fear or convention define their path. They'd chosen instead to ride toward dawn, to build rather than destroy, to prove that sometimes the greatest courage was simply in choosing to stand together against whatever storms might come. And in that choice, they'd found not just survival, but triumph. Not just life, but living. Not just shadows following, but shadows dancing together in the endless light of possibility. The story that began with a desperate midnight ride had become something larger, a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, partnership over isolation, the difficult path over the easy one. Clara and Elias had written their names not in the temporary ink of societal approval, but in the permanent script of lives well lived, choices bravely made, and love that endured like the mountains watching over their valley. Their shadows would indeed follow for years, not as threats or burdens, but as promises kept, dreams realized, and proof that sometimes, against all odds, two people can create their own world and make it strong enough to last. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the Wild West, where love blooms even in the harshest desert. I hope Clara and Elias's story touched your heart as much as it touched mine. Where are you listening to this story? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to connect with fellow Western romance enthusiasts from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more tales of courage, love, and adventure in the American frontier. What did you think of Clara's transformation from frightened runaway to fierce partner? Share your thoughts. Your engagement keeps these stories alive. Until next time, may your own shadows dance together in the light of love.